On September 18, 2014, Scotland made history when they held a referendum that could have seen them separate from the United Kingdom, a political union that has lasted hundreds of years. Such a monumental moment in history, one would think, would warrant monumental media coverage, but the news media's coverage in the months leading up to the September vote was minimal, even on British broadcasters BBC and Sky News. Then, in the final weeks of the campaign, everything changed when Rupert Murdoch's newspaper, The Sunday Times, published a poll that showed the two sides, the yes and the no campaign, literally neck and neck. At that point, the news media coverage literally exploded, with news agencies across the world jumping in to cover the story. Here now is a snapshot of the global media coverage of the Scotland referendum in the days leading up to and including voting day.
On Thursday, Scotland will vote on whether or not to leave the United Kingdom. It may seem like an internal matter for the UK, but an independent Scotland may worry other allies. That's because Scotland is home to the UK's nuclear arsenal.
And both camps are stepping up their efforts in these very final stages. We've had members of the Better Together team there, of course, calling for Scotland to stay in the UK. Well, leading politicians from their camp have been out and about all night, meeting night shift workers in factories and very early morning commuters, trying to reach out to every potential voter they can. And volunteers from both sides are going to be out campaigning again on this last day, trying to mobilise their own supporters, making sure they'll turn out, and also, crucially, trying to reach out to undecided voters.
Two separate polls have given supporters of the union with Britain a narrow 4-point lead. But the pro-independence camp says the result of Thursday's vote is still too close to call.
Yeah, campaigning has remained pretty robust, with the former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown, a Scot, trying to persuade his countrymen to remain in the United Kingdom.
And people there will choose their fate, to stay with the United Kingdom or go it alone as an independent nation. Today, British Prime Minister David Cameron gave an impassioned plea, saying that this vote is a vital turning point for Scotland, and laid out his argument for why unity is the only option for Scotland's further success.
Pretty much. No one really knows what's going to happen. 3 new polls show a narrow 4 percentage point lead for those who support Scotland staying within the United Kingdom. The surveys show as many as 14% of Scotland voters are still undecided.
The leaders of Britain's 3 main political parties are joining forces to keep Scotland from breaking away, or at least try to, and they are vowing to give Edinburgh a lot more power if the referendum is rejected.
It's decision day in Scotland, with more than 4 million voters being asked in a referendum, should Scotland be an independent country? And it's a question which has divided politicians, businesses and even families. But with opinion polls putting a mere 2 to 4 points between the two sides in favour of the no vote, both campaigns yesterday pulled out all the stops to muster support at their final rallies.
Wednesday marked the last day of campaigning in Scotland ahead of that country's referendum on independence from the United Kingdom. Let's do this was the message from the yes side at a rally in Glasgow. Their excitement building as opinion polls show that the vote is going to be very close. More than 4.2 million people are registered to vote. A yes vote would lead to 16 months of negotiations between Scotland and the British government on a host of unanswered questions.
Well, staying with that story, Scotland heads to the polls on Thursday to decide whether it wants to stay part of the UK or become independent. Both the yes and no campaign groups have been fiercely canvassing up to the very last minute, after recent statistics show that the outcome is too close to call, with a Better Together campaign edging ahead by just 2%.
The last voice we heard there was that of Gordon Brown, former Labour leader and Prime Minister. And one would argue, had the No campaign been as impassioned from the very beginning, then perhaps we would be having a different discussion altogether. Because First Minister Alex Salmond does make a point there when he said this referendum was almost held in the belief that it was a fait accompli by Westminster.
In the early hours of Friday morning, we should find out which side has won the referendum. Leading the yes and no campaigns have been these two men, Scotland's First Minister Alex Salmond and Better Together's Alistair Darling. But whether Scotland chooses to remain part of the UK is down to its residents. 4,285,314 people have registered to vote. That's 97% of the eligible population.
Will decide on whether to be independent from the United Kingdom. First Minister Alex Salmond has made a passionate appeal on the final day of campaigning. The leader of the Yes campaign told supporters in Perth to seize what he called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take the future of Scotland into their own hands.
Voters in Scotland will be casting ballots Thursday in a referendum on whether to leave the United Kingdom. Results of recent polls suggest it's a closely contested issue. 48% support independence, 52% do not. Scottish National Party leader Alex Salmond has been leading the move for independence.
It's a momentous day for Scotland and the UK. More than 4 million Scots are deciding if they want to remain part of the United Kingdom or go it alone as an independent state. RT's Polly Boyker reports from Edinburgh, where people are flocking to the polls, wishing to make an historic decision.
That Fleet Street in London is having a field day with the Scotland referendum. So the serious newspapers, the tabloids, you can't get away from the story because it is the story of
the world.
Of the world right now. You know, the cover of the Times of London front page, you know, raises questions. There's the D-Day for the United Kingdom. You have all sorts of political back and forth being reflected on the front pages of the main British and Scottish dailies.
Okay.
So that's interesting to see. Even in the Los Angeles Times, way over in California, says UK's future is at stake as Scotland votes in independence. Of course, this is such a huge, colossal story.
Welcome back. In less than 3 hours, polls close in Scotland, where voters are choosing whether to remain part of the 307-year-old union with England, Wales and Northern Ireland, known as the United Kingdom, or to choose independence. Turnout is expected to be incredibly high for the nation of 5 million people, with some analysts expecting more than 85% of those who are eligible to vote.
Really energise people, and it means we're heading into really uncharted waters because we don't know what the outcome is going to be of that surge in people voting. Earlier on this morning there was a new poll which predicted that as many as 95% of the electorate could turn out to vote, and there have been some anecdotal tales which would suggest that a high turnout is happening. Some ballot boxes were actually ended up being full. There have been reports of many queues in places, and so what does that mean? It means that there's going to be a high turnout. It also means that we don't know, because it's uncharted waters, what the outcome is going to be, what way this is going to go. It's really uncharted territory and incredibly interesting, incredibly exciting, and crowds are beginning to gather here in anticipation of that result at the Scottish Parliament.
Should Scotland be an independent country? That is the question that 4.3 million people are being asked in a referendum that could break the 307-year-old union with England. Counting is underway right now, with results due in just the next few hours.
All right, now we've all had some time to get used to the end of the British Empire. Now will we see the end of Great Britain as we know it? Welcome to Business Brief with me, Matt Herman, in Berlin. The future of the United Kingdom was in the hands of 4.3 million eligible voters in Scotland, and later in the hands of thousands of volunteers.
Voting has begun in Scotland's historic independence referendum. This is a scene live from Edinburgh, where officials are busy sifting through the ballot papers there. A record number of Scots have been voting on whether they stay in the UK or become an independent nation. Polls have shown the no vote has a slight edge, but the outcome remains too close to call. A result is expected later today.
And now, where it is decision day, more than 4 million people there are voting on whether to become an independent country. The polls opened at 7 a.m. Scots turned out in droves. There is little apathy. People know what they decide today could change the face of the United Kingdom forever.
We haven't had an official declaration yet, but we do know that 31 of the 32 regions have declared, and generally it's looking like Scotland has rejected independence.
Yeah, as of 6:15 this morning, it was decided that Scotland had, despite 1.6 million Scottish voters voting for independence, they had voted to stay as part of the union.